Hey Bridget, it's Danielle. I really enjoyed listening to your background knowledge and things that you learned that were advantages and disadvantages to the assessment and testing video that Dr. Forth posted as a podcast. Um, I really enjoyed listening to your perspective as a special education teacher, and how that relates to your personal experiences as a young woman who has had to deal with diagnoses and the unfortunate um, aspect of having people not give you the help that you need, even though you don't have a former diagnosis. Um, I was intrigued by the two different aspects that you had learned from the podcast by Dr. Forth about, one way students use their diagnosis is a crutch. They use it as more of an excuse. I can't do this because I have depression, or I need this accommodation because I have ADHD, even if it doesn't impede their learning, or they don't really need to use that. Um, and then the other half that you had stated was the students that do need the support but are reluctant to ask for help, or the ones whose parents have to really push to have their students receive the help. But in the meantime, it might embarrass the students or upset the students if they aren't in class with their regular education peers. That got me thinking about teenagers in general, and the mental health aspect of um, where do you go to receive mental health services, and at what point do you need help. And I was just really curious as to the data about teenagers and accessing mental health support anyway. So I did a little research, and I found this article um, called Lost in Space: An Exploration of Help Seeking Among Young People with Mental Health Problems, a Constructivist Grounded Theory Study. It is a Swedish article. It's written by Westberg, Nygren, Nyholm, Carlson, and Svedberg. Um, I found it really interesting because it goes into depth about teenagers in Sweden and the lack of support for mental health problems that there are. That young people with emerging mental illness typically lack sufficient symptoms for a diagnostic criteria um, to actually qualify for support in school or just mental health support. Um, I did also find this interesting that teenagers who, even though they had health complaints such as low mood, irritability, nervousness, anxiety, and depression, um, that even with those frequent symptoms and the rates of suicidal attempts and suicides compared to other age groups, this was 16 to 18-year-olds, they were still unsure of when to receive support, how to receive support, um, and if they weren't sure if they even had a diagnosis, or if they weren't sure that they were mentally ill, they weren't sure how to advocate for themselves. And so, after reading through the article, it sounded like young people in Sweden were struggling to find anyone that would take their mental health into consideration. They weren't taking it seriously, that there was a problem between, the in between, like the hospitalized mental health um, spectrum, and the I'm fine, I don't need mental health support. Those in between people, those in between teenagers really struggled. Um, And as I got to reading, it really seemed like those who had parents that were well educated, well rounded, and came from better socioeconomic backgrounds were able to understand and get them the support they needed. But those with parents that came from poor socioeconomic backgrounds or had mental health issues in general um, struggled helping their teenagers find the support that they needed. And there was, of course, a lot of different processes and a lot of different stages of these teenagers getting the support they needed. So, my question for you was, how do you, being blessed with a mother that knew she needed to push for a diagnosis in order to get you support, how do you help those parents that may or may not understand how to advocate for their child? Or how do you help them, from a teacher's perspective, understand the importance of getting an outside diagnosis and or help those older special education students or students that are seeking mental health support? How do you help teach them to advocate for themselves? So, thanks for your post. Thanks, Bridget.